as I was saying about the 2002 coup, the NED was insanely involved in it, very, very deeply. Hugo Chavez says he's produced some documents that he claims verify that they were quite involved in it. And they certainly weren't against it. The president of the Venezuelan chapter of the International Republican Institute, George Folsom, he praised the coup. He said, last night, led by every sector of civil society, the Venezuelan people rose up to defend democracy in their country. Well, that's very funny how you would phrase the defense of democracy as a coup against a legally elected government. That's very funny. They also heavily supported the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center in Venezuela. And they do that across the spectrum, primarily because as they subsidize unions, these unions are usually of a conservative nature, and they kind of keep radical labor militancy at a low point. Well, without radical unions, people, especially across the global South, have a difficult time getting what they need. Getting a substantial wage, a livable wage, even from business and centrist right-wing governments and owners. Right-wing centrist business owners and governments. And that's very important because, again, by financing those unions, by financing those labor organizations, it enables those labor organizations to take that money and channel it into the political process in a variety of ways. Again, buying the equipment, etc. In Venezuela, they subsidize a union called the CTV. I believe it's the Confederation of Venezuelan Workers. And they utilized labor stoppages and a variety of direct techniques and subversive techniques in order to really bring about the element and aura of uncertainty and instability that is always a necessity in order to have a coup. You can't, if the government's stable and nobody's worried about anything, nobody's going to overthrow anything, because the public just won't accept it. But by creating that aura, with the money that they got, they used it to like I said, finance various purchase of fax machines, copies, newsprint. It would able to get their propaganda across, etc. Well, the NED tripled assistance to Venezuela in the months before the coup. I believe it was 9 months before the coup, and the Solidarity Center was given $150,000 from the NED. Specifically to support the CTV. And the CTV, leader, Carlos Ortega, worked closely with Carmona Estanga, the man who took power during the coup and was praised by the International Republican Institute, etc. The leaders of NED-supported groups also landed major roles in the short-lived coup, because keep in mind, these coup government only lasted about 2 days. Leonardo Carvajal, he was with the Association Civil Assemblée de Education, was made education minister. And that civil group was heavily financed with NED money. Leopoldo Martinez of Primera Justicia, is a right-wing party, a right-wing civic group, was made a right-wing business group, actually. He was made finance minister after it. And it's not just me, again, sitting here saying that the NED is, a very, very ominous and subversive organization. The New York Representative Congressman Charles Rangel, he's a Democrat. He's charged the Bush administration with helping oust Juan Aristide in the coup that happened in Haiti. And he says they're trying to do the same thing with Chavez as well. Ron Paul has gone on the record also as saying that he doesn't like the NED, and Cynthia McKinney as well. So it's not just me sitting here saying that. Getting away from Venezuela momentarily, at least. The Solidarity Center in Iraq also gets a lot of NED money. They financed that money into the General Federation of Trade Unions, which was established under the Ba'athist regime of Saddam Hussein. The Union of the Unemployed in Iraq, which is a very progressive union that has engaged in labor stoppages and has engaged in direct action and protests against the U.S. occupation and oppressive business techniques that, essentially promulgate the land in Iraq at the moment. They said that their history was as bloody as the history of the Ba'athist regime. The NED has also historically funded some things that would just make you shake your head and wonder, what were they even thinking? For instance, during the 1980s, they funded labor movements that were centrist again and conservative in countries like Portugal and Spain and France. These are countries that were democracies, and in France's case, had a democracy that was about as old as American democracy. So was it really that far in trouble? In France, was democracy that much in trouble that we had to donate? I think it was millions of dollars of taxpayer money. Some of the money wound up going to very hardcore right-wing groups in France too. At which point, once that became public, French people, astonishingly enough, weren't too pleased that the American government, under the auspices of a non-governmental organization that is almost completely financed by taxpayer money, state money, had been messing around in their democratic principles. Just like, any reasonable person in the United States would be upset at the same thing. In fact, such activity would be illegal here. So it's important to note that. It's also important to note that across the board, while the NED claims to support groups that have no voice in their government and have no recourse, to take measures against oppressive governments or participate meaningfully in democracy, the vast majority of their funding, the only notable exception being supporting groups that opposed Pinochet in Chile in the late 1980s, the vast majority of their funding doesn't go to groups in Indonesia or Colombia, labor unions there that are fighting oppressive techniques, oppressive tendencies within the government. They don't go to democratic-minded organizations in countries, that are friendly to the United States, no matter how repressive the regime. For instance, I don't know that the NED gives any money to Saudi Arabian dissident groups, and Saudi Arabia is one of the harshest regimes in the world. I'm sure they don't give any money to Palestinian groups. I mean, you can bet your bottom dollar on that. But who's more under siege than the Palestinians in the world right now? And in Haiti, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the NED gave $189,000 to different groups. One group, the Haitian Center for the Defense of Rights and Freedom, that was headed up by Jean-Jacques Honorat, who, after a coup overthrowing Jean-Bernard Aristide, he just happened to become the prime minister. Closer to home, the NED has given money to the Cuban American National Foundation. They gave $400,000 to them between 1984 and 1988. At the same time, the Cuban American National Foundation set up a political action committee that donated an equal amount to pro-CANF politicians. That's very, very fishy that the exact same amount the NED gave them was used to finance candidates who would put forth pro-CANF legislation in Congress. And theoretically, even if that money specifically wasn't earmarked, it didn't go to the politicians. It's important to directly. It's important to note that every dollar that the NED gives to the CANF or other groups like it across the world is a dollar that those groups don't have to spend for themselves on these techniques. It's a dollar they don't have to spend on equipment. It's a dollar they don't have to buy commercial time with. It's a dollar they have, now they can use it in other ways, which enables them to bombard the other side of the argument, which is usually, almost without fault, the more democratic and more popular side of the argument, side of the debate, side of the government, what have you, in these various regions. We get into part 3. I'm going to go on a little bit more with. We're going to talk more about funding, and we're going to get into whether the NED has possibly given money that supported terrorist actions almost directly.